on the ground. But it's one which is now being taken much more seriously by Mitt Romney and everyone else. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, Washington.
These are the headlines on Al Jazeera. It might take days for the full extent of a deadly prison fire in Honduras to be known. More than 350 inmates may have died. Many of the victims were trapped in their cells, unable to escape. More inmates are still unaccounted for. The country's president, Porfirio Lobo, has suspended prison officials and ordered a full inquiry into the disaster. Iran says it's made new strides in its nuclear program. President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad unveiled his country's first domestically produced fuel rods on state television. The U.S. State Department says developments are nothing new. Greece's finance minister says his government has met the final demands of its lenders to secure a new bailout loan, but a final decision to give Greece the money won't be made until Monday. Syria's president has announced a referendum on a new draft constitution to be held in less than 2 weeks. The proposed draft will allow a multi-party system for the first time and introduce limits for presidential terms. But the opposition say Bashar al-Assad must step down. On the ground, meanwhile, the violence continues. An oil pipeline was blown up in clashes between Syrian forces and opposition fighters. China's vice president is in Iowa State as part of his 5-day tour of the U.S. Xi Jinping spent the first part of Tuesday focused on what he called the mutually cooperative partnership between the two countries. Xi met with Republican and Democratic congressional leaders. He also spoke at an exclusive lunch in Washington and called for more trust between the U.S. and China. In Thailand, police are looking for one more suspect in connection with Tuesday's bomb attacks in Bangkok. So far, 3 Iranian nationals are under arrest. Thai authorities say they're investigating whether Israeli interests may have been targeted. The Australian airline Qantas says it'll cut 500 jobs after it made first quarter losses of 83%. Qantas is blaming fuel prices and multiple strikes that grounded its fleet last year. And he may be gone, but Kim Jong-il is definitely not forgotten in his home country. Thousands of North Koreans have been lining up to pay their respect to their former leader in Pyongyang. It's part of a week-long celebration to mark what would have been his 70th birthday. He died of a heart attack in December. Inside Stories coming up next on Al Jazeera. Do stay with us.
Republican presidential candidate Rick Santorum urges opponents of same-sex marriage to keep fighting as another U.S. state legalizes it. You're watching Inside Story U.S. 2012 from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lisa Fletcher. 7 U.S. states and the District of Columbia have now legalized gay marriage. Washington became the latest state on Monday. In California last week, gay rights groups celebrated after a ruling that the state's ban on same-sex marriage was unconstitutional. With at least 3 other U.S. states actively considering legalization, it is an issue likely to be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. As Republicans do battle for their party's nomination, the top candidates oppose gay marriage, and none more loudly than former Senator Rick Santorum, who has warned that unless traditional marriage and the family are protected, quote, our country will fall. He wants one marriage law for all 50 states and an amendment which would invalidate existing gay marriages.
I would be a voice in speaking out for making sure that every person in America, gay or straight, is treated with respect and dignity and has the equality of opportunity. That does not mean that I would agree with certain things that the gay community would like to do to change laws with respect to marriage or respect to adoption and things like that.
In the very beginning in 1994, I said to the gay community, I do not favor same-sex marriage. I oppose same-sex marriage, and that has been my view. But if people are looking for someone who will discriminate against gays or will in any way try and suggest that people that have different sexual orientation don't have full rights in this country, they won't find that in me.
So how much of an issue is gay marriage for voters in this election year? And to what extent do the views of Republicans like Rick Santorum reflect U.S. opinion? To discuss that, I'm joined by David Maggie from the Pew Research Center's Forum on Religion and Public Life. And here in the studio by Michael Cole-Schwartz from the Human Rights Campaign. They're the largest group promoting gay equality in the U.S. And by Maggie Gallagher, co-founder of the National Organization for Marriage. Thanks to all of you for being here.
Thank you.
So we just heard from the two Republican frontrunners who have made their positions against gay marriage very public and very defined. Maggie Gallagher, I want to start with you. Is that a wise strategic move to take such a strong position on gay marriage during the election?
Well, I don't think that it's a strong position to say that you think marriage is the union of husband and wife and should remain so and be protected from federal courts like the one that just tried to strike down Prop 8. And I think that's the reason you see that all three of the leading candidates, Santorum, Romney, and also Gingrich, have endorsed a federal marriage amendment, signed the National Organization for Marriage's marriage pledge, and why President Obama has been trying to fudge his position on the marriage issue. He clearly understands that it's not a winning issue to be for gay marriage.
Let's take a look at where this issue stands among Americans. Public acceptance of same-sex marriage in the U.S. has nearly doubled over the past decade. The most recent national poll shows that 40% of Americans support gay marriage, while another 23% say gays should be allowed to form civil unions but not legally marry. 31% oppose any legal recognition. 7 states have legalized gay marriage. Same-sex couples can also marry in Washington, D.C. In California, gay marriages, which took place between June and November of 2008, are legal. And last week, a court ruled that the state's gay marriage ban is unconstitutional. And bills supporting gay marriage are making their way through the legislatures of Illinois, New Jersey, and Maryland. David Maggie, talk about the trends here and what the U.S. opinion is on gay marriage.
Well, there's no question that there's been a shift in opinion more in favor of same-sex marriage in the last 10 years. We at Pew have been polling on this issue since 2001. And in 2001, there was almost a 20-point difference between those who opposed same-sex marriage. They were in the very, very clear majority, and those who were in favor of it, who were in a very clear minority. Today, our polls show that it's virtually even. I think the last one that we did in October of 2011 showed 46% of Americans opposed to same-sex marriage and 45% of Americans in favor. So it's gone from being a clear majority against same-sex marriage to essentially a divided country on this issue.
Michael Cole-Schwartz, what do you attribute the uptick in support for gay marriage to, and then contrast that with the position Rick Santorum is taking?
Well, clearly the American people are going through an evolution on this issue, whereas once this may have seemed like a distant issue that, had to do with someone else, more people are coming out. People are realizing that same-sex couple lives down the street. They might be your friends or your relative. And I think American people are coming to realize that loving, committed couples, no matter they be gay or lesbian or heterosexual, want and deserve the same kinds of protections. So that's why you're seeing this trend. And what's happening in the Republican primary, unfortunately, is you're seeing a lot of rhetoric that goes against that idea, that is divisive and is excluding gay and lesbian couples from marriage. So, I think what may be playing well in a Republican primary is going to be difficult for those candidates when they enter the general election.
Maggie Gallagher?
Well, Michael, I just think you're living in a dream world if you think it's going to hurt a candidate for the President of the United States because he's not for gay marriage. Maybe in the dream world you'd like to create in 20 or 30 years. But in the world we live now in, every single time the American people have had the chance to vote, 31 out of 31 times, not just in those funny states down south, but in deep blue states like California and Maine, when they've really had a chance to vote, they've said, yeah, we do want to express respect and concern for gay people, but we really don't think two guys in a committed relationship are a marriage, and that's not what we want law to teach our children and grandchildren.
Let's take a look at how gay marriage rates as an issue for voters in 2012. In a series of polls conducted last month, more than 50% of voters said the economy is the most important issue, while issues of moral or family values ranked as most important to only about 2% of those polled. In a New York Times CBS News poll published on Tuesday, few Republicans who described themselves as primary voters said they wanted to hear the candidates talk about abortion or about gay marriage. Is this a winning issue, David, for Republicans? Is this a vote getter?
I don't think it's something that most voters are really thinking a lot about, to be honest with you, and I think the polls that you cited show that. We did a poll early this year asking people what their sort of top concerns, the biggest issues that they're thinking about as they think about who they're going to vote for are. Same-sex marriage didn't even rate in the top 20. You know, the only thing that was even close was a sort of decline in morality, and that could be anything from same-sex marriage, depending on your perspective, to what's going on, let's say, or perceptions about what's going on Wall Street or whatever. So most people are concerned, as you said, about the economy. They're concerned about jobs, taxes, the budget. They're concerned still about terrorism, but same-sex marriage, abortion, the so-called culture war issues, they're not really on the top of people's agendas, most voters' agendas. Now, there are people, you know, particularly socially conservative people and very socially liberal people who think of these issues as being more important than, say, people in the middle. And there are times, and maybe your guests can speak a little bit to this, there are times when things like same-sex marriage do come to the fore. We saw that to some degree in 2004, in the 2004 presidential election. And of course, that was just after Massachusetts had become the first state to legalize same-sex marriage. And I think that surprised a lot of people in this country. And so the issue, I think, really bubbled up, not quite to the top, but certainly a lot higher than it had been, and I think a lot higher than it is right now, in at least the minds of many voters.
Michael Cole-Schwartz, do you agree? Is this an important issue for voters?
Certainly the economy and jobs are what voters are caring most about this election cycle. And I think when you contrast that to the Republican candidates going out there talking about making life harder for families, and those would be gay and lesbian families who are married, who want the same things under the law, that's the disconnect. When you have, when you're running on a platform of saying we want to make it more difficult for these types of families, that's where they're getting away from that economic message that is what the American people want to hear.
Is this an anti-family message, Maggie?
Well, I don't think so, but I'd like to go back to the political because I just happened to be looking at the polls, the Quinnipiac poll from Ohio, which shows, which is a must-win state for both the Democrats and the Republicans. It's a key swing state. And among all registered voters, not just Republican primary voters, Rick Santorum is emerging as the Republican who voters say cares most about the problems that people like them face. So I think a lot of this is a false dichotomy that's media created and media driven. You can stand for traditional values, including marriage as the union of husband and wife, for the value of every human life, and you can take your case to the broad American people on creating an America that makes us all better off.
So how do we explain Santorum going up in the polls with his strong pro-family, pro-traditional values message, yet the other polls that we see, David, saying that public acceptance of gay marriage is equal, if not slightly higher than it has ever been?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily same-sex marriage or gay marriage that's driving support for Santorum. I do think that it's an issue, particularly for him, because he's staked it out as a big issue throughout his entire career. And of course, we had other things that have come to the fore in the last couple of weeks. The fight between the White House and the Catholic Church over the new Health and Human Services regulations regarding contraception and health insurance. That may have helped him as well. But we've also seen a lot of Republican candidates come up and then go down again. And I'm not saying that's going to happen to Rick Santorum, but there's been a lot of churn, a lot of flux in the Republican race. This may just be that, or obviously it may be something else, but we don't really know yet. And I think it's hard to say for sure what's absolutely driving his candidacy and his success in the last couple of weeks.
I think that's totally fair, and we'll see what happens. The pundits have been wrong all along, and I'm not predicting the future. But I will answer that question. I think that Americans like to see a guy who's standing up for what he thinks is right, even if maybe they don't agree with him. And one of the things Rick Santorum is definitely benefiting from is that people don't think he's poll tested, focus group tested, that he has core convictions. And whether if you're an absolutely pro-choice voter, you're probably not going to vote for him. If pro-gay marriage is your #1 issue, you're not going to vote for him. But the rest of the world looks at a guy like Rick Santorum and they say, a man who is fighting for the good as he sees it. And they respond to that quality in a politician because it seems too rare.
Narrowly on this gay marriage issue, public polling is contradictory to what your party stands for, and certainly what Rick Santorum
no, that's
stands
not
for.
what didn't the Pew poll just say that only 40% of America, this was you broke, only 40% support gay marriage. And I'll tell you what we found is that polls have consistently overstated support for gay marriage because Americans are becoming sensitive to how the question is worded, and they're also concerned about, they don't want to appear anti-gay. But when you go to the polling booth, it's clear that this is a very mainstream winning position in America today, whatever Michael hopes to create in America down the road.
Well, certainly, though, the point that you're missing is the evolution that we're going, the direction that these numbers are moving, where support was, you know, half of what it is now, maybe 10 years ago. You know, we're seeing the trend go toward more equality, more acceptance for gay and lesbian couples.
I think that's true, but progressives treat trend lines as a substitute for a faith in God, excuse me. It's like the future hasn't happened yet. We don't know what's going to happen. When I was younger than you are, and life was the issue because of Roe v. Wade, I was told that the pro-life sentiment would be virtually disappearing from the public square because all the young people were pro-life in 1978. Instead, as the movement has worked to stand for values and pull other Americans together, we're now in a country where close to half of people now say, or more, say they're pro-life. So we'll see what happens in the future. But I will promise you today and in November in 2012, not being for gay marriage is not going to hurt Santorum or Romney or Gingrich.
David Mashi, do you agree?
Yeah, can I just make a couple of points? It was 45% in the last Pew poll in favor of same-sex marriage, not 40%. But still, 46% opposed. So I just wanted to clarify something.
But when you include civil unions, that drop, I'm talking about the Pew poll that she cited in the opening segment, which showed 23% for civil unions, 30-something against any recognition, and only 40% who actually support gay marriage if they're given the alternative.
Right, that was a New York Times poll from yesterday.
Yeah, it wasn't a Pew poll.
Sorry,
but
sorry,
I also wanted to.
I don't want to blame Pew for that.
That's okay. I just wanted to mention also, I agree with Maggie when she says that polling sometimes doesn't get this. In California, there were a whole slew of polls before Proposition 8 was approved that showed Proposition 8 being defeated, and of course it was ultimately approved, admittedly by a slim margin, but still I think it was 51 to 48 or something. So, you know, sometimes polls don't get this right, and I also agree with her about abortion. You know, in fact, if anything, the number of people who oppose abortion has actually ticked up in recent years. So we don't know what the future holds. On the other hand, I would like to just reiterate something that I think Michael alluded to, and that is that, you know, the trends certainly have, at least for the last 10 years, been going in the direction of support for same-sex marriage. And I think very important for supporters of same-sex marriage, younger people, people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, are much more likely to favor same-sex marriage than older people. In fact, the older you get, the more likely you are to be opposed to it. So the most, you know, the greatest, you know, the age cohort with the greatest opposition or the largest number of opponents of same-sex marriage is the oldest, and of course that cohort is actually disappearing as they pass away.
But that cohort is also the largest number of active voters.
That's
also
true.
The fastest growing age segment because we didn't have children. My generation forgot to have children.
But people as they age are not, their support for marriage equality is not declining. I think there's nothing to suggest that younger people as they get older will suddenly decide, no, people like myself who are gay don't deserve the right to be married.
Let's take a look at some of the things Rick Santorum has said. He's consistently spoken out against gay marriage. Sometimes those comments have proved controversial because of his choice of words. In particular, in 2003, he came under some fire from top Democrats and gay rights groups when he said, quote, "The definition of marriage has not ever, to my knowledge, included homosexuality. That's not to pick on homosexuality. It's not, you know, man on child, man on dog, or whatever the case may be. It is one thing, and when you destroy that, you have a dramatic impact." And on the campaign trail, Santorum has had a number of energetic discussions on this issue, particularly with students, such as here in Pennsylvania.
Pierce Morgan called me a bigot because I believe what the Catholic Church teaches with respect to homosexuality. I'm a bigot. So now I'm a bigot because I believe what the Bible teaches. Now what 2,000 years of teaching and moral theology is now bigoted. No, this has profound consequence to the entire ecology, moral ecology of America. It will undermine the family. It will destroy faith in America.
Maggie Gallagher, Santorum is clearly speaking to his conservative base here. What role will value voters play in the upcoming election?
Well, I feel bad for Mitt Romney. I think playing all these Santorum clips is going to help him enormously in Michigan and win. And I do think it's fair, even though I personally support Rick Santorum, I think it's fair to say that Mitt Romney's been quite eloquent on the importance of marriage and also the issue of religious liberty, which now is a burning front burner issue because of President Obama's decision to try to force priests for life and nuns who run religious broadcasting networks to pay for contraception and abortion pills. And so I think what Rick Santorum is pointing to in that clip is that not necessarily Michael here, but a number of gay marriage supporters now say that you're a bigot, like someone who opposed interracial marriage, if you continue to support the great truths of Genesis and the common sense understanding of marriage. And I think that the more people recognize what's happening out there, the greater the potential for a backlash, whether you're for gay marriage or against gay marriage, against that kind of rhetoric that suggests there's something illegitimate or hateful about believing and acting on the belief that to make a marriage you need a husband and wife.
I think what you saw in that clip from Senator Santorum, though, shows how the sort of anger about this issue and coming not from a place of acceptance or wanting to treat people equally, but his career has been marked by opposing equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender people. And it's when you see clips like that that it is such a disconnect from where most people are. They're struggling with this issue if they are not, have their minds made up. I think it is a small minority of people who are so fervently anti-gay as Rick Santorum.
Is this about opposing equality or opposing gay marriage?
I don't think you have to be anti-gay to oppose gay marriage. It's the collapse. This is where I think the gay marriage movement is making a mistake, to collapse those two positions. So I just want to flag that.
Well, Rick Santorum, though, is not only anti-marriage for gay couples. He is against laws. He is against the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He is against employment non-discrimination protections, hate crimes laws. Marriage is certainly a key issue for lesbian and gay people, but it is not the only one. And there are a number of issues when you look at the candidates that they're not only opposed to the American people, but they have a stark contrast with the president.
I think most people are going to look at the guy and think that he's acting from a place of core conviction, fighting for what he thinks is right. And unless they're really core gay marriage voters, they're going to be attracted rather than repelled.
Michael, has President Obama fulfilled his promises to the gay community?
President Obama has done a tremendous job. He's certainly been the most pro-LGBT president we've had and made the most difference in the lives of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. He has been the one to sign the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, to sign a federal hate crimes law, to ensure that same-sex couples are able to visit each other in the hospital, and a slew of other accomplishments that really set up a stark contrast between those positions where equality is the guiding principle, whereas division and discrimination has been the guiding principle for people like Rick Santorum.
Now, there are members of the gay and lesbian community who would say Obama has not followed through. It took him 3 years to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and that was because a lot of pressure was put on him. He hasn't legislatively done anything really other than that. Who carries the torch for the gay and lesbian community in this upcoming election? Obviously, from your perspective, it's not the Republicans. Can it be President Obama?
I think there's a tremendous amount of energy in the community supporting the president, supporting him, because he has been there for us. He has, as I said, repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, a long process that seemed like it might not have ever happened, gone up against Congress and got the votes there to do it. Signing the hate crimes bill, the first major piece of gay rights legislation ever passed out of Congress. And those are two landmark things, and certainly there's more to do. There's more that we need to do, but I think the president has a tremendous record, and people are going to support him for that.
Barack Obama has repeatedly described his view on gay marriage as still evolving. Last week, the White House spokesman was again asked if he could articulate the U.S. president's position. Here's what he said.
Well, I don't have any update for you on that particular issue with regards to the president's views. I can tell you that divisive and discriminatory efforts to deny rights and benefits to same-sex couples are something that this president has long opposed.
Michael, some might say that Obama's lack of a full embrace on this and his words like still evolving may indicate that this issue actually has more gravity in the election than the polls would indicate, and that the Democrats would like voters to believe. Is that the case, do you think?
Well, I certainly can't get inside the president's head. I think, though, how he has described his evolution on this is something that's indicative of the way many Americans are feeling about this. You know, they have gay friends, they have gay family members, they have gay coworkers. You know, marriage has been an issue that maybe they haven't gotten over the hurdle with, but, you know, they're working through it, they're talking about it, and that conversation is good. I think the fact that we're having that conversation as a country is the reason why we've propelled forward, the reason why we are seeing marriage now in 6 states, in the District of Columbia and Washington State becoming the 7th, hopefully. You know, that is why we are moving in that direction. It's because people are having that evolution and that we continue having those conversations.
Speaking of evolution, New Hampshire may be about to become the first state to repeal gay marriage, so evolution works in both directions. But I think fundamentally President Obama is hoping that the Supreme Court will carry his water for him and impose gay marriage in all 50 states. So the federal courts have now struck down a marriage amendment approved by the people. It's going to the Supreme Court. There is an election between now and the time it gets to the Supreme Court, and I think that's going to help the Republican nominee.
David Masci?
Yeah, we're not sure that it's going to get there before the election. I mean,
after the election.
Well, the proponent, I'm sorry, I thought you said before. But also the Supreme Court may not take this case. It was quite narrowly decided, and some people say that it was intentionally narrowly decided so that it would either survive Supreme Court review or that the Supreme Court would deny cert, not take the case, and wait for something, maybe something that's a little more broadly decided before they weighed in on this. So we're not really sure exactly what's going to happen at this point. I think there was a belief before the Ninth Circuit issued its opinion last week that this was going to go to the Supreme Court, and it still very well might. But I also think that there's at least a decent chance it won't, at least this time around.
We've got less than a minute left. Michael, I want to start with you. What's the strategy for gays during the election year?
Well, I think that we're going to have a stark choice when it comes to November. President Obama has done a tremendous job for our community, has really stood with us, and we are going to be standing with him. I think no matter who the Republican nominee is, on the marriage issue certainly, but on things like Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and whether or not we'd want to roll that back, on whether or not there should be any recognition for gay and lesbian people. Okay. Those are motivating factors for us.
Maggie, about 10 seconds.
The Supreme Court is going to impose gay marriage in your state, whether you like it or not, if President Obama gets to appoint the next Supreme Court justices. That's what I think, and that's why I think this is going to be an issue that helps the Republicans.
Thanks to all of you for a very lively discussion. That's it from the Inside Story team here in Washington, D.C. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about our program. And as always, we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at InsideStory@AlJazeera.net.
The Brazilian Amazon, home to the world's most complex natural environment. Many of those who live here believe if the Earth's lungs collapse, so too will the planet. A groundbreaking 3-part series examines the fight for Amazonia. Coming soon on Al Jazeera.
Jaffa, a once thriving Palestinian port where Christians, Jews and Muslims worked the orange groves together. Then Jaffa the symbol used to support a political agenda. Now Jaffa the global brand, dividing opinion across the world.
It became a symbol of aggression of how this was taken over by the force of power.
Witness Jaffa, the orange's clockwork, at this time on Al Jazeera.
The exploitation of the vulnerable. conceptions of justice. The shifts in power. People and power at this time on Al Jazeera.
See the world from every angle and every side.